Thought I'd show you the little Yamaha's headlight meter speedometer shell. I just completed the bead blasting. In fact, I haven't even blown it off yet. But you can see it's got a nice even patina. It's got a little tooth to it. There's no dents or damage to it at all. I soaked this in, well, the first thing I did is I did an initial bead blast, blew it off, then I soaked it in overnight in a rust remover to dissolve any rust that was in the pores, because just bead blasting does not necessarily get rust out of pores, and it will come back unless you use a certain kind of primer, which actually I'll be using anyway, but that's a moot point for this conversation. So I soaked it 24 hours, or overnight rather, in a rust remover. Then I took it out and then I bead blasted it again just now this morning. And I wanted a nice even tooth for the primer to stick to. Now, the primer I'll be using is an epoxy type of medium build primer, which is designed to prevent rust from reforming. It's for automotive use. The next operation then will be to blow it off really well outside, because there will be media in the crevices here. The media I used to blast this, by the way, I did change out my cabinet, was black diamond, which is, I believe, crushed coal slag. And on steel, it does a really nice job, as you can see here. I wouldn't use it on aluminum or any softer metals, but for steel it's great. Blow it off, and then I'm going to rinse it really well in clean acetone, fresh acetone, and make sure it's good and clean. At that point, well, at the point I begin using acetone, I'll be wearing gloves. Two reasons. One is to protect my hands from the acetone, and number two, to protect the part from the skin oil on my hands. And then I'll shoot it with a primer. Shooting with primer is the quickest part. That's the easy part. It's all the prep work that goes into it. But in any event, I thought you might be interested in seeing how the headlight shell came out. It's about 24 hours later, and you can see in the frame the Yamaha headlight meter shell. It's been primed. Primed this 24 hours ago. I think you can get a pretty good look at it there. You can see the Yamaha label and part number right there. See the inside, of course, is hard to get. It's got 2 coats of a medium build primer, and I'm reasonably happy with the way this turned out. So what I'll do now is I will tack this off, and it's early in the morning right now. It's a little cool out. It's in the low 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and I want the temperature to come up a little bit to pushing 70 before I spray the top coat, which will be that Yamaha gray. That's very common. We've all seen the Yamaha gray. Front fender is in the same color. So this will be, the final coat will be done. I'll probably put at least 2 top coats on, if not 3. Here in a few minutes, probably be 45 minutes to an hour before I start laying down the paint. I like to paint early in the morning because it's nice and quiet. There's no wind, there's no dust in the air. Excuse me. There is a little bit of a, I don't know if you can see it here, a little bit of a dimple right there that I missed. Now I could scuff this and fill it with a body filler right over the primer, and then I'd have to re-prime it again. I'm not going to do that. I think when all is said and done and this is put together, you're never going to see that little depression right there. And I don't know if it's damage since the bike was put in use, or it came from the factory that way. Who knows? But anyway, now we'll do the top coat today, and then I'll let that dry for a couple of days before I handle it again. It's now 2 days later. I've allowed the part to sit and dry for the last, or cure out for the last 2 days. It's early in the morning, and this is the finished paint for the headlight shell meter. This is where the meter, of course, goes for the Yamaha YL1. And it didn't come out too bad. I used a single stage high gloss enamel, so there was no clear on this. These bikes were not originally cleared anyway, and in fact, if anything, this gloss still might be a little bit too high, but it is what it is. And it didn't come out too bad. There's a little orange peel. Problem I ran into is just as I was starting to apply the final coat, I put three coats, 2 primer, 3 top coats. And just as I was getting ready to lay down the third and final coat, I started to run out of paint. And I didn't get as good a coverage as I probably would have preferred, but it still looks okay. A little orange peel. I'll probably do a little bit of color sanding to even it out a little bit, but I'm reasonably happy with how it turned out. The original paint on these bikes was not very good to begin with. You can see that little bit of a dimple right there, but again, I'm not worrying about that at this point. The original paint on these bikes wasn't great to begin with, certainly back in the day, and I think they just shot them with a single coat, non-primed single coat of probably a lacquer-based paint. So this is at least equal to, if not better than, the factory paint. So again, I might do a little color sanding or polishing and try to get a little bit of that orange peel out, but I'm happy with how that turned out. My next step here will be to start assembling together all the pieces that have been painted for the bike, and I'll do excuse me, a little video segment showing various components as I'm getting ready now to start putting the bike back together. Here's the current state of the YL1 project. You can see the frame here. It's all painted. The body of it, the maroon, the burgundy maroon, I guess you'd call it, or red, I painted last fall of 18. Before the weather turned, that was done in October. I just got that in before it got too cold to paint outside. You can see the steering stem I put together, I think, in a previous video a while back. You can see that assembled. The silver, that Yamaha silver, that rear fender, I just painted the other day, a couple of days ago, when I did the meter headlight shell right there. This is that same fender, if you recall, maybe you don't if you didn't watch the video, where I had to piece that fender together right in there from 2 separate bikes because the original had been bobbed. I had to cut it off and fixture it and weld it up, grind it back, and repaint it. And avoid a shadow. Came out really well. In fact, that paint came out really well too. You can see there. And that's painted 2-3 days ago. It's good and dry. That's a urethane based. It's a single stage urethane based enamel high gloss paint. In other words, there's no clear coat on it. That is an enamel, which by definition is a hard high gloss finish. Enamel is not a type of paint. It's really a type of finish, which typically means high gloss and hard. And I'm quite pleased with the way that silver came out. In fact, I'm pleased with the way the whole thing came out, for that matter. Here you can see some of the various other components assembled, ready for, or laid out, ready for final assembly. Headlight shell we've already talked about. Front fork ears that will hold the headlight meter shell. The lower front fork stanchions. Obviously the swing arm. Now that is not the original swing arm for this bike. The original swing arm was broken off on the end of it, on one of them here. So I sourced a good used, no, I take that back. I made a mistake. The original swing arm was beat up. It had a lot of road rash on the inside, on both sides, and was scarred up really bad. And I didn't really want to put the time into filling it and welding it and grinding it back. So what I did do, because it was pretty badly damaged, what I did do instead is I sourced a second swing arm that you see here. This is not the original. That had one of these ears, the adjuster ears, broken off that I'm pointing to. The original swing arm had both of those adjuster ears intact, so I cut one of them off from the original and welded it on. I'm not sure anymore which side it was, and welded it up. And that was like a 5-minute job, 10 minutes with grinding, and it was back to usable condition. So swing arm, center stand, that's powder coated, by the way. I did powder coat that in my shop along with the pivot bar for the center stand. And here we have the motor, or the engine. The engine's as complete as I'm going to take it to this point before I install it in the bike. You can notice the cylinders, pistons, and heads are off. I do that intentionally because it makes the motor quite a bit lighter to install. And that's at the point I'm at now, is what's next in terms of installation. Now typically when I do a little bit more modern bikes, modern being relative in the projects that I work on, that would be the tubular framed, the typical tubular framed motorcycles. This is not, this is an earlier stamped metal frame. When they're tubular framed, I normally put the engine in first before I do anything else. And in fact, quite often what I'll do is I'll lay the engine on its side. So if the engine was sitting up would sit up like this, like that one does, I would tilt that engine on its side, and usually the right side. So I would take that motor and flip it over like this, and then I drop the frame, the tubular frame, right over the top of it, pin it into place, and then rotate it up. The reason I do that is I normally work alone. I do have buddies I can get over to help me, but I find it's much easier to put the engine in first. In fact, my Kawasaki H2 750 triple, I did that way. I had someone help me because it's just such a big motor. But I put the engine on its side, dropped the tubular frame over the top of it, pinned it in place, and rotated the frame up, and then I had the engine in the frame. And I find it's easier to do it that way than trying to get the bike up on its wheels and then try to get the motor up into the frame and load it from one side or the other. Now on this bike, being it's a stamped metal frame, I'm not exactly sure my approach right now. I think I'm going to go ahead and put the engine in next. I will probably put the center stand on right there, get it up on the center stand, and then figure out a way to lock the center stand so it can't rotate out from underneath me while I'm fiddling around with the motor. And then I will, I think I'm going to mount the motor first and then put it up on its feet. But I got to think that through a little bit more. I've got to check all the hardware for the engine mounting. I know I've got it somewhere. It's probably going to have to be replated, zinc plated, before I go ahead and put it in or use it. And that will be the next step, is check the engine mounting hardware so I can figure out where I'm at and getting that repaired or reconditioned so I can go ahead and start putting the bike back together. The primary painting now is done with this bike. The only thing that's left that I recall is the fuel tank, which we've already talked about, and I have not sorted that process out to get the finish chrome done. There's the frame side covers at the bottom, you can see here, and the front fender. These parts, all three of them, were painted last fall of 2018, and they've been in storage ever since. So what I'll be doing here in the next few months is getting these out, going back over them. I might have to do a little color sanding on the side covers, the body side covers here. The front fender came out really good, and I think I'm going to just leave that alone. I don't think it even needs any color sanding. I might just do a little polishing, but I got to take a closer look at the two red side covers to decide what I'm going to do long term. I won't need those for a long time anyway. Those will be one of the very last things to go on the bike. But these are the other three components that I didn't talk about a moment ago in the other video segment. I think that's going to be it for this little review. And as usual, thanks for watching.